Contemporary scholarship is beginning to synthesize previously disparate fields and examine more obscure aesthetic categories than the beautiful or the sublime. Sianne explores three such categories, the zany, the cute, and the interesting, arguing that these represent fundamental shifts in how we understand our culture and ourselves. Ngai asserts that these aren't coincidental or natural movements in philosophy and criticism. It's not that. Prior philosophers and art critics weren't done categorizing the sublime and beautiful, the two Kantian categories Ngai uses as a counterpoint to these three, and they just didn't have time to talk about these ideas in a philosophical work. But rather, the zany, the cute, and the interesting are either modern inventions or attain new impact and meaning in the process of modernization. Similarly, the synthesis of academic fields doesn't just happen because there's nothing left to do in aesthetics, media theory, sociology, and critical theory, her primary approaches, but rather because of the fundamental distinction between art, media, person, and institution beginning to dissolve. This forces a combination of these fields. Quote, the rise of the weak or trivial aesthetic categories in this study thus takes place in conjunction with an overarching habitualization of art and theory, and the loss of long-standing tension between the work of art and commodity form. A brief aside on the style, Ngai is really blunt and efficient with her language to a fault. Sentences, although they tend towards 5 to 7 lines, tend to be discrete thoughts. It's a very slow, rich, comprehensive read. She front-loads her core arguments, which is good, as this is largely the definition of terms and where they should be, and exploring and defining the terms feels a little bit like chipping away at a statue. It's a really slow and rewarding and sort of negative space process. The mutability of art and commodity is a big concern of Ngai's, as she takes a largely Marxist/modernist reading of these terms, stemming from debates in media and critical theory, which media theory kind of came out critical theory, so makes sense. For instance, the cute became an aesthetic category in its evocation of care, intimacy, and violence through implied power relations, quote, an eroticization of powerlessness. The cute is a characteristic, emphasis on character, of something as well as a response, an important thread throughout each one of these terms. Additionally, the relationship is a highly complicated, weirdly mimetic one. Seeing something cute evokes a copying of it, while the zany is generally a sort of othering. The zany embodies, quote, a strenuous relation to playing that seems to be on a deeper level about work. Zany characters are high energy, comedic, and dedicated, but in that comedy comes some irony and failure, and Ngai argues that it is that functions both as a celebration of and a critical deconstruction of capitalistic overworking, a protest against work and play getting combined into each other. Here, Ngai also introduces the concept of performing, a key part of her understanding of how these aesthetic categories work, and their ability to form relations between the subject and the consumer. The interesting acts somewhat differently as a more explicit meta-category. Ngai affiliates it with genre, of realism, and notes how it is primarily defined by its ability to engage either the consumer or the people the consumer talk to. Primarily built out of relationships rather than the things themselves, the inter of interesting, it's a new way of creating tension and explaining messy relationships in modernism, like that of sociology, aesthetics, and critical media theory, say. Brief aside, I think it's really interesting to look at the early internet around these ideas. She cites the Double Rainbow video, but early 2000s webtoons are almost always centered around these ideas, cute she's kitten songs, the egg song, zany homestar runner making things, and the interesting, perhaps Ultimate Show of Ultimate Destiny, stickman fights, chat rooms, Epic 2015 seems really on point, interaction in general. This is a vast oversimplification of the arguments. You can only do so much in 5 minutes, and I remind you all that I don't 100% agree with every conclusion that Ngai comes to, and much needs further exploration. She spends some time exploring the edges of what aesthetic categories means and justifying their use as primarily characteristics, again, kind of delightfully evoking lesser-known works of Hannah Arendt, Kant, John Guillory, Nick Zang, Frederick Jameson, and their work outside their most well-known fields. But her use of the term genre and form still needs more poking. It should be noted that she rejects a metaphysical project here. Quote, my wager in this book is that finding a way to grasp this historically specific configuration, if not exactly system of aesthetic categories, will be similarly salutary for getting a handle on postmodernism as Jameson does. good book, well worth the read for anyone in the related field. See y'all next time.